Hi, I'm Nick McLean with Four Pillars Investors. I have almost 20 years of experience in private equity, mergers and acquisitions, investment banking, you name it. I've created a course, a small segment of which follows, and it really is just a very small segment. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Your network is your net worth. I'm sure you've heard those before. Do you think of them as being trite or actually somewhat useful? Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say as I take a lot of stock in those two expressions. However, I will say that building relationships, in my view, is one of the single biggest predictors of success, maybe in business generally, but definitely in trying to buy a business. Throughout the process of buying a business, you are going to have to form very strong relationships with the seller, with the seller's advisor, if you have one, and many other intermediaries and interested parties, not the least of which to include the SBA loan officer that you're working with. If you don't make building solid relationships a priority, I'm not going to say that your search won't be successful, but it's going to be more challenging, and I think it's going to take a lot longer time. Now, I'm not just saying that I think building relationships is important because I'm creating this course for business owners. If you look at the name of Four Pillars Investors, the very first pillar is relationships as a cornerstone for success. We did not make it that just because we thought it sounded good or we thought it would be effective when we told people that was one of the pillars that we stood for. Not at all. This is a pillar that we live every day. My partner and I or my colleagues will be talking about a deal and we'll often ask the question, what do we need to do to build the relationship? Or which strategy is more consistent with building a solid relationship? Might not be everybody's choice in terms of how they structure conversations or how they think about different strategic decisions, but that's the path that we have chosen and it works for us. Now, you don't have to take that path. However, I will strongly encourage you that if you undervalue building solid relationships, you're going to be in for an uphill climb on this process. As it relates to our approach for building relationships, I would say there are three different components. One, bigger pie. Two, servant leadership. And three, it's not about what you want. What do I mean by those three? Well, first, bigger pie. The concept here is that I always try to think about how to increase the size of the pie as opposed to increasing the size of each piece of the pie. In other words, if you can expand the size of the pie, then how big your individual piece is less important because overall it's going to be worth more towards you. Now, I completely understand how that could be challenging in certain situations. I definitely have been in conversations where I feel like it's a zero-sum game and I'm tempted to try and fight for a little bit bigger slice. However, in the long run, what I have found is that an approach or a mindset of trying to be more proactive and more intentional about creating a bigger pie often yields more positive results. Servant leadership. Servant leadership is another one of the four pillars, and I do not think that it's fully understood by a lot of folks. In my view, servant leadership is about removing obstacles of the people that you're working with so that they can be more effective. This 100% applies to the search process and obviously is why I'm bringing it up here. The loan officers, sell-side advisors, even the business owners themselves, they deal with a lot of people, a lot of buyers that take the mentality that your challenges are your challenges, I'm not going to help out in any way. Now, obviously, when it comes to running the business, of course, it's the business owner's responsibility. But as it relates to the process, I think it's important to think about what you're going through from the other person's perspective and try to remove any challenges that are present to the extent that you can. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of work that the seller has to do, and you can't do that work for them. For example, financial reports and this and that. But to the extent that there are various stages in the process where you're able to help make the business owner more effective, I would say jump at those opportunities every chance you can get. Same goes for the loan officer, same goes for the sell-side advisor. The third component, it's not about what you want, is similar to servant leadership, but it's still slightly different and warrants its own bullet, if you will. What I mean here is best described by the concept of phone versus email. I know a lot of folks watching this course will probably be a bit earlier in their career and part of a different generation than I am. What I will say, in my experience working with folks in the younger generation, is that there is a strong preference for email communication over phone communication. I get it, it can be effective. You have all of your thoughts written down. You can go back to it several days later or weeks later and see what you said exactly so that there's no confusion. I like those aspects of email communication as well. But in terms of building relationships, a lot of times email just doesn't cut it. A phone call is what's needed. A more advanced member of my team early on definitely demonstrated this, was very apt to send very long emails whenever I thought that a phone call would be better served. There was resistance at first because that person's natural style was to send emails instead of phone conversations. Wasn't necessarily uncomfortable spending time on the phone. In fact, his prior role required him to be on the phone a lot. However, in this circumstance, he mentioned some of those same components that I said earlier. There's a record of it. I want to get all my thoughts down so that I make my point clearly, et cetera, et cetera. However, what he was eventually able to find, though, is that there's a lot of topics, a lot of discussions that are just too nuanced and difficult to put into words. And whereas you might be willing to spend the time to carefully craft an email, it's unlikely that business owners are willing to spend as much time in a response as you did on the initial email. For that reason, a lot of times a phone call is more important, but it expands well beyond just phone calls and emails. I would encourage you to really think about what the seller expects, what the loan officer expects or would like to see, and think about how you can cater your style to what they would like to see. Now, obviously, if they're saying, well, we don't want this component in our offer, we just want all cash, for example, that's where you're gonna have to draw the line. I mean, you can't give them everything that they want. However, if the request is for a Zoom call instead of phone, absolutely, Zoom is great. If the request is to meet at Tuesday at 10 a.m. instead of Thursday at 2 p.m., make it happen so that you can accommodate their schedules. Those are very little things. They're not going to win you a deal. However, if you do those little things over time, you're going to build up some social capital. And if you are successful at consistently adding to the coffers there, then whenever you need to go to the seller and ask them for something that they might not want to do, you have that reserve built up, that rapport that you've built with them, so that maybe you're able to convince them that your way should be the path that they choose. Now, I'm not saying that this course is going to be the end-all, be-all for everyone. However, at the very least, if you do want to buy a business, I think you owe it to yourself to at least check it out, learn a little bit more about it, and see if this might be the right next step for you, for your career, and for your family. Thanks for watching.